Imagine an island, small, surrounded by water on every side, covered in pine trees and marshy inlets. On it stands a settlement, wooden houses, a fence of sharpened logs, a few dozen families fighting every day to survive in a land they hadn't even heard of a month earlier. The year is 1587. 115 men, women, and children land on this shore to build a new life here. 3 years pass that a ship returns with provisions and reinforcements. But the settlement is emptied, and no infants, no adults, no bodies, no signs of a battle or a fire. The only thing the 115 people left behind is a single word carved into the trunk of a tree, and no letter, no note, no explanation. What happened to these people? Where did entire families disappear to, including newborn children? And why does this mystery remain unsolved even after more than 400 years, despite modern archaeology, DNA analysis, and dozens of expeditions? Today we'll tell the story of one of the greatest mysteries in human history, the Lost Colony of Roanoke. And by the end of this video, you might just decide for yourself which version sounds the most convincing. Chapter 1. The Race for the New World, 1:45 to 8 o'clock. To understand what happened at Roanoke, we first need to understand why the English ended up there at all. In the 1580s, Spain had already spent decades growing rich on gold and silver from South America. The Spanish crown was building fortresses, sending out galleons, controlling entire sea routes. England, by contrast, was only just beginning to stake its claim as a maritime power. Queen Elizabeth I understood, if England didn't establish itself in the New World now, it would forever remain a secondary player in this race. This is where Sir Walter Raleigh enters the picture. One of the Queen's closest favorites, an adventurer, a poet, and an organizer of expeditions. Raleigh receives a royal patent to colonize lands in North America, which he names Virginia, in honor of the Virgin Queen, Elizabeth. The first attempt was made back in 1585. A small group of a few dozen men, mostly soldiers and explorers, without women or children, lands on Roanoke Island. Their goal was to survey the territory, establish relations with the local Algonquian tribes, and lay the groundwork for a permanent settlement. But nothing went according to plan. Relations with the local population quickly soured. The English, desperately short of food, began clashing with tribes that had initially been friendly toward the newcomers. It escalated into skirmishes, in which one of the local Secatan tribe's chiefs was killed. When an English fleet under Sir Francis Drake, returning from the Caribbean, happened to arrive at the island in 1586, the exhausted and frightened colonists asked to be taken back to England. The first attempt to colonize Roanoke ended in evacuation. It would seem the story should have ended there. But Raleigh doesn't give up. In 1587, he organizes a second expedition, this time far larger and better planned. Unlike the first attempt, this time it's not just soldiers heading to the New World, but entire families, men, women, children. This was meant to be not a military outpost, but a genuine colony, with farmers, craftsmen, even pregnant women on board. Leading the expedition is John White, an artist and cartographer who had already been to Roanoke during the first attempt and knew the area well. Among the settlers is his own daughter, Eleanor Dare, and her husband, Ananias Dare. On August 18, 1587, just a few weeks after arrival, Eleanor gives birth to a girl. They named the child Virginia Dare in honor of the new land. She becomes the first child of English descent born on the territory of what would become the United States. For a moment, everything seems to be going as well as it could. A new beginning, a new life, a symbolic first American child. But within a few weeks, it becomes clear supplies are catastrophically running low. Winter is approaching, and the colony hasn't managed to plant enough fields or establish stable trade relations with the local tribes, some of whom still remembered the hostility of the previous group of settlers. It's worth understanding the conditions these people actually lived in. Roanoke Island isn't fertile flatland. It's a narrow strip of sandy soil, surrounded by swamps and shallow channels. The coastal waters of the region, which sailors would later nickname the graveyard of the Atlantic because of the hundreds of ships wrecked there, made even basic resupply difficult. Farmland needed to be cleared of forest, and any delay in planting threatened starvation long before the first frosts. Relations with the local population also remained fragile. The Algonquian tribes of the region, the Secotans, the Wepamiak, the Croatoan, had their own complicated system of alliances and rivalries long before the English arrived. The colonists effectively found themselves caught up in local politics they barely understood, and any wrong move could cost them the support of one tribe and earn the hostility of its rivals. It's against this fragile backdrop, dwindling supplies, approaching winter, uncertain relations with their neighbors, that the colonists make a decision. Someone needs to go back to England and bring reinforcements and provisions as quickly as possible. The natural candidate is the colony's own governor, John White. This means he'll have to leave his daughter, his son-in-law, and his newborn granddaughter behind on the island. White hesitates for a long time, but in the end he agrees, confident he'll be back within a few months before winter sets in. He promises his family he'll return as soon as possible. He doesn't know this is the last time he'll ever see his daughter and granddaughter alive. John White sails for England at the end of August 1587, fully intending to gather reinforcements quickly and return. But history had other plans for him. The moment White arrives in England, he finds the country on the brink of war. The Spanish Armada, a massive fleet assembled by King Philip II, is preparing to invade England. Every available ship, including any that might have carried supplies to Roanoke, is mobilized to defend the English coastline. White tries to convince the authorities to spare him even a small vessel. He manages to organize an attempt in 1588. Two small ships set out across the Atlantic. But along the way, the ships are attacked by French pirates. The vessels are damaged, part of the crew wounded, and the expedition is forced to turn back to England without ever getting close to the American shore. Meanwhile, back on Roanoke, across the ocean, 115 people remain without a single piece of news from home. Imagine what that meant for them. No letters, no ships on the horizon, only uncertainty, an approaching winter, and increasingly strained relations with the local tribes. What did they eat? How did they survive the winter? Did they try to reach out to any other English settlement on their own? We simply don't know. No records of these months and years have survived. The Spanish Armada is finally crushed in the summer of 1588, and it would seem England could now return to peaceful affairs. But victory didn't mean an instant return to normal life. The English economy was drained from years of war spending. Trade routes remained dangerous because of the remnants of the Spanish fleet and Atlantic piracy, and the investors who had previously funded Raleigh's colonial projects were now far more cautious about risky transatlantic expeditions. White spends literal years going from one powerful figure to another, seeking funding. In his own diary entries, he describes endless promises that never turned into actual ships or provisions. Every month of delay in London meant another month of uncertainty for the family he'd left behind across the ocean. Only in 1590, 3 long years after he left his family on the shore of Roanoke, does John White finally secure permission and ships to return, and even then, only because he joins a private privateering expedition whose owners agreed to drop him off at Roanoke merely as a side stop, not the main destination of their voyage. The journey turns out to be long and grueling. The ship doesn't reach the coast of North Carolina until August 18th, exactly 3 years to the day since his granddaughter Virginia was born. White later wrote that as he approached the shore, he didn't know what to expect. Perhaps he imagined a joyful reunion with his family. Perhaps he feared finding starvation, disease, or worse. He could not have imagined that he would find no one at all. The landing is complicated by stormy weather and shallow water around the island. It isn't until the evening of August 18th that White's crew finally reaches the place where the settlement once stood. Silence. No smoke from chimneys. No voices. No movement. As the crew enters the settlement grounds, a scene unfolds before White that he later described in his own records. The buildings have been dismantled, not burned, not destroyed by a storm or an attack, but deliberately taken apart, carefully, methodically, as if the residents had intentionally disassembled their own homes to take the building materials with them. This alone is a strange detail. People fleeing in panic from an attack or starvation don't dismantle their houses board by board. This looks far more like a planned, controlled relocation. All around, a complete absence of any signs of violence. No bodies, no skeletons, no broken weapons, no bloodstains, no signs of fire or battle. White's crew walks the perimeter of the former settlement and comes across something that would become the most famous symbol of this entire story. Carved into the trunk of a large tree, a single word, Croatoan. A little further on another tree or fence post, just 3 letters, Ciro, possibly an unfinished inscription. Here it's worth explaining an important detail. Before leaving for England in 1587, White had agreed on a signal system with the colonists. If they ever had to abandon the settlement, due to starvation, conflict, or any other reason, they were to leave the name of their new destination somewhere visible. And if they ever found themselves in mortal danger, they were to add a cross symbol to the inscription. There was no cross. For White, this carried a specific, almost reassuring meaning. The colonists had left voluntarily, in an organized way, and likely without any immediate, deadly threat. The word Croatoan is the name of a tribe and of an island of the same name lying to the south, closer to present-day Hatteras Island. The Croatoan tribe had fairly friendly relations with the English colonists dating back to the first expedition, unlike some of the other Algonquian groups in the region. White tries to reach Croatoan Island immediately to find his daughter, his son-in-law, and his granddaughter. But nature gets in the way again. A powerful storm rolls in, typical for the Atlantic coast at that time of year. One of the ship's anchors breaks loose, and part of the provisions is lost. The ship's captain, fearing for the safety of the crew and the vessel itself, categorically refuses to continue sailing along the dangerous, shallow, and poorly charted coastline. White is persuaded to return to England, regroup, and outfit a new, better prepared expedition for the following season. He agrees, seeing no other option. That following season never comes. John White will never return to the New World again. He dies in England roughly 10 years later, never having learned for certain what happened to his daughter, his son-in-law, and his granddaughter. 115 people, including the first English child born on American soil, simply vanish from the pages of official history. The absence of a definitive explanation hasn't stopped theories from piling up. Over more than 4 centuries, researchers, historians, amateur enthusiasts, and even novelists have proposed dozens of versions of what actually happened to the colonists of Roanoke. The assimilation theory. The most popular, and according to many modern historians, the most plausible version. The colonists really did go to live with the Croatoan tribe or other neighboring Algonquian peoples, gradually integrating into their society, intermarrying with the local population, and assimilating over the course of 1 or 2 generations. This theory is supported by indirect but fairly compelling evidence. As early as 1607, when the English founded the new colony of Jamestown, rumors begin circulating about clothed people living among local tribes to the south. Captain John Smith, the well-known leader of Jamestown, mentions in his own records reports of surviving Roanoke colonists allegedly spotted among tribes to the southwest. Even later, in the 18th century, travelers and settlers who encountered members of the Lumbee tribe in North Carolina reported a somewhat unusual appearance among some tribe members: lighter skin, gray or blue eyes, and in some cases even knowledge of a handful of English words or surnames that matched those of the missing colonists on White's original list. Names such as Dare, Cage, or Sampson. The modern Lumbee tribe still partly maintains an oral tradition of shared origin with the Roanoke colonists, although genetic research on the question remains inconclusive and doesn't definitively confirm anything either way. The starvation and disease theory. Another version is considerably darker. Some researchers believe the colonists really did attempt a peaceful relocation, possibly to Croatoan Island itself, exactly as the tree carving indicated, but that due to the island's limited resources, a failed harvest, or an outbreak of disease, a significant portion of the group died over the following months or years, leaving behind no recognizable traces. The archaeological conditions of this region, the damp, acidic soil of the coastal strip, break down organic remains quickly, including bone and wood. This means that even if the colonists really did die somewhere nearby, the physical evidence may simply not have survived to the present day. The attack theory. There's also a much darker version, based on testimony gathered considerably later by the English at Jamestown. According to Chief Powhatan, the leader of a powerful alliance of Algonquian tribes that the new English colonists would later encounter, part of the Roanoke group may have been wiped out in an armed conflict with a hostile tribe, possibly even before the main group managed to relocate to Croatoan. This version remains controversial among historians, partly because such testimony was obtained through interpreters years after the events, and may have been either inaccurate or even strategically exaggerated by Powhatan himself for his own political purposes in dealing with the English. The dispersal theory. Modern archaeologists from the First Colony Foundation project lean toward a more complex, dispersed version of events. The colonists may have split into several smaller groups shortly after White's departure, part of them staying on Roanoke itself or relocating to Croatoan, while other groups may have headed inland to various allied native settlements in search of better conditions for survival. If this version is correct, it would immediately explain why no single discovery provides a definitive answer. Pieces of the answer may be scattered across several archaeological sites, located dozens of kilometers apart from one another. The Dare stones, forgery, or evidence. We can't skip over one of the strangest chapters of this story, the so-called Dare Stones. In 1937, a man named Lewis Hammond brought a stone to Emory University with a carved inscription, supposedly left by Eleanor Dare herself, describing the fate of part of the colonists, including the deaths of several people, among them, the little girl Virginia. At first, the stone caused a sensation. Several dozen similar discoveries soon appeared across the southeastern United States. But by the 1940s, journalistic investigation revealed that the overwhelming majority of these stones were forgeries, made for the cash rewards that collectors and the university were offering for new evidentiary finds. The mystery in popular culture. It's worth noting that the Roanoke story has long since moved beyond purely academic debate. For more than 80 years now, an outdoor theatrical production dedicated to this story has been staged every summer on the island itself, drawing thousands of tourists from across the country each year. The word Croatoan has become such a recognizable symbol in American culture that it shows up in literature, film, and even band names, often with no direct connection to the actual historical event, simply as a symbol of an eerie, unsolved mystery. And that's hardly surprising. Few historical mysteries combine such a powerful emotional charge. Entire families vanishing, a newborn child, a father who returns too late, and a single word that explains nothing while raising only more questions to in the 21st century. Interest in the Roanoke mystery hasn't faded. If anything, bolstered by modern technology, it has only grown stronger. Archaeologists with the First Colony Foundation Project have spent the last 20 years conducting systematic excavations both on Roanoke Island itself and on Hatteras Island, the historical territory of the Croatoan tribe. On Hatteras, researchers have uncovered a genuine treasure trove for historians. Fragments of 16th century English weapons and armor, copper fishing hooks of European manufacture, shards of English-made pottery, and, particularly significant, rings and other personal ornaments that, by their style and material, clearly belonged to English settlers rather than to the local tribes. Most importantly, these artifacts aren't found in isolation, but mixed in with items belonging to the Croatoan tribe itself, the same cultural layer, the same everyday living conditions. This is a strong archaeological argument in favor of the peaceful assimilation theory. It appears that part of the colonists really did settle alongside the tribe, continuing to use some of their own English belongings in daily life, while gradually transitioning to the local way of living. Alongside the archaeology, a separate group of geneticists and genealogists has launched what's known as the Lost Colony DNA Project, attempting to compare the genetic material of modern descendants of known Roanoke colonist surnames with members of the Lumbee tribe and other native communities in the region. It's also worth mentioning recent satellite and geophysical surveys. Modern archaeologists are using ground-penetrating radar and soil analysis to detect possible building foundations or burial sites without having to excavate the entire island by hand. Some researchers suspect that the remains of the original 1587 settlement may have been partly destroyed by coastline erosion. Over 4 centuries, the Atlantic Ocean has claimed a significant portion of the island's territory, meaning some evidence may simply now lie underwater. For now, the results remain partial and not conclusively proven, partly because more than 400 years have passed, and partly because of how difficult it is to trace exact family lines across such a vast historical span. So, despite all our modern technology, the official answer to the question of what happened to the Roanoke colony still sounds the same. unknown. The mystery officially remains unsolved. The story of Roanoke isn't just a detective story about missing people. It's a story about a father's hope, a man who promised to return to his family as quickly as possible and returned too late. It's a story about a little girl, Virginia Dare, whose name has forever remained a symbol of the new land, but whose ultimate fate we will, in all likelihood, never know for certain. Just think about it. Every year, thousands of tourists visit Roanoke Island, walking the same paths, looking out at the same shoreline where these 115 people once landed. The tree bearing the word Croatoan no longer exists. Time and storms have long since taken care of that. But the word itself has lived on, passed down through generation after generation of researchers, writers, and curious viewers like you. 115 men, women, and children left behind only a single word carved into a tree. And that one word still drives archaeologists, geneticists, historians, and ordinary people around the world to search for an answer. One that might be hiding somewhere beneath the marshy soil of North Carolina, waiting for the researcher who will finally make that last discovery. Or perhaps the answer has been living among us all along, in genealogy, in oral tradition, and in the very blood of the Lumbee tribe's descendants, who to this day consider themselves heirs to that lost colony.